Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the greatest games on the Blizzard. My name is Marcus Speller. With me is Jonathan Wilson. And with us today is Vithushan Ehantharajah, sports writer for The Independent and Indie Sport, and also a part of the Football Ramble. Vish, lovely to see you.
Thanks for having me back, I suppose. Yeah, very, feel honoured. I feel like this is the kind of thing that, you don't get two This Is Your Life appearances, do you? And I feel like this is my second.
We're not talking about you. Have you forgotten the format?
We're not sort of reviewing the time you came on the show previously.
I thought this was what it was. Yeah, you've done Greatest Games. Now you've done the greatest episode of the Greatest Games. So I was coming back to talk about myself. Yeah,
it's the greatest men is why you're on here. Well, actually, ladies and gentlemen, the real reason Vish is on is we're going back to 29th of September 2001 to talk about a match at White Hart Lane that finished Tottenham Hotspur 3, Manchester United 5. Vish, why have you chosen this game?
I've chosen this game, partly to right or wrong because I talked about Liverpool to Arsenal. Liverpool to Arsenal 1. Yeah, in my first appearance here, and I thought I should talk about my team, Manchester United. But to be serious, this feels like the game that when people talk about Manchester United and their ability to come back from deficits and the game's never done, this is that game. Now you can obviously point to the 99 Champions League final against Bayern Munich, but the very nature of this being 3-0 down at half time and winning 5-3, even the idea that all the goals were at one end of White Hart Lane I find quite amusing. And we've seen this season Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has lent on a lot of Manchester United's history, as it were, and I think this season United have taken the most points from losing positions, and so I decided to do a little bit of research, just about historically, in Premier League history, that is, about teams that have gained the most points from losing positions. Manchester United are top with 348 and counting. Do you know who's second?
I will say Tottenham Hotspur.
Yeah, they are Spurs.
Yeah, it's interesting, eh?
Yeah, it's fascinating, really.
But how far away from Manchester United are they?
18 points. Manchester United have 348 and Spurs have 330.
Well, I'm quite surprised at that, I have to say. But then Manchester United, I suppose, they weren't often behind because they were such a dominant side.
Well, they were at this period. I mean, if you think, even in 98-9, they went behind. Mm-hmm. I'm going to say something like 11 or 12 times that season, and got away with a draw or a victory. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the. The United were going into this game having won 3 league titles in a row, but I think the thing Ferguson was aware of was the need to tighten up, that they were too loose, that they couldn't afford to give the opposition a start, and I think that was really true in Europe. So you look back to the defeats to Monaco and Dortmund before 99, and then they'd had the defeats to Real Madrid when really they were a better team in 2000. Then the defeat to Bayern. Was it Bayern or was it
Bayer Leverkusen on away goals? Was it that was this season? 01-02.
But the previous season I think was to Bayern. Was it? It was
Monaco.
Yeah, it was
perhaps?
to Bayern. It was.
Okay.
It was definitely to Bayern.
Okay.
But anyway, I mean, the Madrid game I think is the one where they draw 0-0 in the Bernabeu. This is the quarterfinal in 2000. They drew 0-0, get it back to Old Trafford, and suddenly find themselves, because of a key known goal and 2 goals in the break, they find themselves chasing the game in the second half when really they were much the better side. And it was one of those games where the narrative sort of runs out of control and people are sort of, look, United undone by clever opposition. And actually, it's slightly more complicated than that. They were much the better side, but they allowed that kind of result to happen by being so open. On the normal balance of play, they should have won it. Karanka should have been sent off for a handball on the line. But the point was they put themselves in a position where they could let in 3. And so I think the signings that Ferguson makes, bringing in Varane, even to an extent bringing in Van Nistelrooy, were an attempt to play a slightly more possession-heavy, controlled form of football.
What about Laurent Blanc coming in? I mean, obviously he's a bit older, but was he then brought in to kind of steady it at the back a little bit, perhaps?
I guess experience, yeah. I mean, I mean, it didn't really work, that signing, did it? That's what
No.
One of the old men he brought in who didn't really click with. I mean, he was coming in specifically for the Yapstam. Is that true?
Well, Yapstam had left for Lazio, big money. Because Veron had gone the other way.
Yeah, but I mean, the Stam thing was because Ferguson felt in his autobiography he'd sort of breached confidences, by his famous description of the Nevilles as being busy. And I think that was almost a point of principle. And Ferguson did the whole thing of Stam being past his best, but I mean, he clearly wasn't. He kept on playing perfectly well.
So he brought in a 35-year-old Lauren.
But he did regret. He did regret the letting Yapstam go though, Fish, didn't he? He said he regretted that one.
Yeah. Only when enough time had passed that people had stopped wondering what he was doing. Yeah. I remember I used to find Blanc so infuriating because I think Sir Alex Ferguson had tried to sign him 3 times before he eventually got him. Well, maybe this was the 3rd time he went for a signature and eventually got it. And obviously World Cup winner and we know his class, but to watch him, you're like, he's just so slow. You go from someone like Yapstam, who was just his meaty legs and just meaty Yapstamness, to going to Blanc, who, whenever someone says the phrase knobbly knees, I think of Laurent Blanc. He had the knobbliest knees imaginable. But the one thing about him was, I don't think I've seen a Manchester United player with a better first touch than Laurent Blanc. His first touch was out of this world. He would come out of defence and, if he wasn't clearing balls away, he would just take the ball down his chest or his thigh, or just his, the touch, right under himself. And, we'll talk about the game and the goal he gets, which is the only goal he scores for Manchester United.
In the league? In
the league, yes. Yeah. But it's, it was a peculiar time for, I mean, this is so privileged, isn't it? I was going to say it was a peculiar time for Manchester United fans, as if.
I mean, they were the champions in this particular match, but yeah.
But I mean, I think there was an odd sense of things beginning to fall apart. So there's been a very specific thing. I mean, I just started working as a journalist by this point, and the thing I remember was that the summer before this, the summer 2001. United went on a tour to Australia, and they were at a training session in Sydney, and they were stretching before the session started, and Dwight Yorke fell asleep during the stretching, and the rest of the squad went off for a lap of the pitch and left Dwight Yorke just sort of sitting there asleep. So that was one of the reasons Yorke was bombed out, that he couldn't be trusted to stay awake during training. I mean, and if you think of Ferguson as this sort of ferocious martinet, this great disciplinarian, he's the last person you'd imagine having even somebody as laid back as Dwight Yorke falling asleep during his training sessions. So I think there was a sense that, yes, they won 3 in a row, hadn't really been challenged for the second 2 of those. And that there was a little bit of entropy had set in, and there was a need to put things right. And just 2 weeks before this game, United had lost 4-3 at Newcastle, which was another game where you sort of saw the defensive issues, the fact that the midfield and the back four wasn't quite working together, and that there was a vulnerability there that we really weren't used to.
Do you think the sort of aura of the treble-winning side, this was when it really started to kind of die out and dim, perhaps? Because the following season, there was that documentary made. They obviously won the league. They had that quarter-final that you mentioned in the Champions League. It could have been a little bit different. By now, you say Yapstam's left. Later on in the season, I mean, he played, of course, in this game, but later on in the season, Andy Cole would go. At the end of this season, Dennis Irwin, Ronnie Johnson, they left. These are players who started that Champions League final. Sheringham had already left for Spurs. Is it sort of a transitional period? We've mentioned a few of the signings that they had, Vish. Did you think that this was one of those ones where Ferguson was trying to figure out, right, that side now is kind of, not every player, there were still a number of players, but that sort of team, that, as I say, aura has now sort of faded, and he's trying to come up with something new?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think we, it's been brought up a lot nowadays with regards to, Pochettino is probably the most recent one when, Miguel Delaney, my colleague at The Independent, has written about this quite a lot, and he's tweeted about it even more, I think, about how, one of Sir Alex Ferguson's best qualities was knowing how to refresh a squad. And this period, just from what you were saying there, Marcus, this was the biggest of them all, and you could argue that maybe it was a season too late in terms of how this season ended up going for United. And you look at the players he did bring in. Van Nistelrooy was a success, but you couldn't say that of Veron, you couldn't say that of Blanc. So he was
Diego Forlan as well.
Yeah. So he was certainly trying to work it out, and had more misses than hits. But the Dwight York story you just said there, Jonathan, that's quite interesting, because I can't imagine anyone, even you said even someone as laid back as Dwight York, just quite literally falling asleep on Sir Alex Ferguson's watch. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And I wonder if there was a sense among that group that they felt a bit untouchable, because certainly Cole, when he left United, was very outspoken. And I think there was an interesting bit of commentary in this Spurs United game where they mentioned that Cole is still on the England radar. And I can't remember when he got his last cap, but I remember watching him at that period and thinking, like, he's on his last legs. He was blowing all the way through the game. He comes alive in the second half, but he looks a bit like an old man through that game. And I think you got the impression that a lot of those players who came out of that 99 season, I suppose, who went on to leave, came to a realisation that level was beyond them in this particular season.
Yeah. I think there's also, though, I think there's just sort of a natural sense that teams have a sort of 3-year cycle, and then you have to begin to refresh. And I think, as you say, and Miguel has said, Ferguson was a master of it. And you look at 95 when he called Hughes and Kanchelskis and one other. Who's the other one he called? Ince. So yeah, those three of Ince, Hughes and Kanchelskis all went, and it seemed sort of at the time, a crazy decision. Why would you cut out 3 of your best players? But it's because he knew that there was a sort of a stagnation that begun to set in. And there's a really interesting line from Nicky Butt towards he's talking about the title in 2001, so the third straight title, and he says we'd stopped enjoying winning the league, which makes it, if it's not, I guess if it's not a challenge for you, then maybe those little frustrations with teammates, and you look at this squad, and obviously there are some characters in there who maybe weren't easy to get on with. I mean, Schmeichel had gone by this point, but I think Schmeichel was probably quite difficult in the dressing room, as well as being a big personality who helped you win games on the pitch. If you're dealing with him day to day, Keane, obviously, I can, Yap Sam clearly had problems with the Nevilles. So I guess it happens in any workplace. If people are together for too long, the little frictions blow up into something a bit bigger, particularly if you lose that sense of a common mission.
Yeah, but they did have a challenge, though, of course, because Arsenal would go on to win the league, and this would really started the Arsenal-Manchester United rivalry back then. Yeah,
I mean, I'm not sure how serious a challenger Arsenal was seen as being at the start of this season.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
I mean, I think Leeds were seen as. I mean, look, I'm trying to remember what I was thinking as a profoundly naive journalist at the time, and I'm pretty sure I sort of thought it was a Leeds v United scrap, and Arsenal coming through to win the double,
and Liverpool finished second as well. Manchester United were third this season.
So I mean, look, obviously Arsenal go on to have one of their greatest ever seasons, but I'm not sure that even at this stage, although I think Arsenal were top at this point, when they, I think it was, I think Arsenal. I think United, by winning this game, go level with Arsenal at the top, and Leeds played on the Monday and went above the two of them. So it was the three of them battling it out at this point, end of September. I can't remember what the question was, but I'm not sure that we thought we realised quite a good Arsenal were, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, it was the challenge that Arsenal posed, with Wenger's Arsenal, who would be invincibles not long after this season, of course, and that great rivalry between the two sides, which is perhaps what Manchester United maybe needed by what you're saying, Jonathan, and what you're saying, Vish, as well, that the inertia had set in. They were kind of going through the motions. Nicky Butt said that they weren't enjoying winning the league anymore, and then along came Arsenal and kind of gave them a bit of a kick up the arse. But in this particular game that we're covering, it was Spurs who, within the 90 minutes, gave them a kick up the arse. And we'll talk about the game after this quick break. Welcome back to the Greatest Games on the Blizzard, everybody. Right, gentlemen, let's get to the actual match itself. Manchester United, we mentioned their defence hadn't looked great that season, really, especially on the road. They had a very poor defensive record on the road, Vish. They go away to White Hart Lane, Tottenham under Glenn Hoddle. Some decent players in there. Gus Poyet, of course, a veteran strike force of Les Ferdinand and Teddy Sheringham, of course. But when the game starts, one wouldn't envisage Tottenham doing what they did.
No, United started pretty brightly. I was, just as Jonathan was trying to reminisce about what he was thinking as a naive journalist, I was trying to think back to what an even more naive Vish would have been thinking at the time. but I remember, I'd grown up with football and having two strikers, but something about Van Nistelrooy and Andy Cole together didn't quite fit with me. When United had Cole, York, Sheringham and Solskjaer for that 99 season, you could kind of piece two together. You could work out different combinations of what would work. But with Cole and Van Nistelrooy, I really got the impression that they not only did they want the same space, but they both wanted the same thing, which was primarily goals.
But you don't think, when you're talking about the combinations before, other than Cole and Sheringham, a lot of that is on Sheringham because of the role he was sort of famously playing.
Yeah, Solskjaer could drop off a foot. I mean, though he's a great poacher, he also could play wide, he could play deep. Mm-hmm. So it was possible to the only two you wouldn't have played together then. No, because York could drop off as well. So you could actually play any of them, because York is the only one who can't really play as the out-and-out striker, and Cole is the only one who can't really play as the slightly deeper lying striker. Mm-hmm. My assumption here is that Ferguson assumed Forlan would adapt much quicker, and Forlan could have played the slightly deeper role. If you think of how he played for Uruguay with Suarez, he could that would have been the role that he presumably was expected to play here. And I think Van Nistelrooy, I mean, obviously there'd been the delay with the transfer that they'd signed, and then he got injured, so the transfer was put back. But I assume the plan was for him to ultimately replace Cole as he does. But I'd be amazed if the idea from the start was for the two of them to play together.
Mm-hmm. And the midfield for Manchester United that day, obviously Beckham, Button, Scholes, and Veron's in there. I mean, it's a decent midfield, but Veron, he came on a huge money, huge reputation. The type of guy who would run games, who would be such a powerhouse in the midfield for Manchester United. It didn't quite work out, Vish. And I know you're a fan of Veron. He's playing. Were you disappointed that it never quite clicked with him at Manchester United, or perhaps in hindsight you're not surprised?
I wouldn't say disappointed, but genuinely quite sad, because it felt like, I don't know, it felt like the last Infinity Stone. It felt like, right, this is when it gets serious for Manchester United. This is, everything comes together and they become a consistent continental force. I don't want to sit here and, given the amount of gibberish I spout on the ramble, I don't want to sit here and then poke holes in Sir Alex Ferguson's tactical brain, as it were, but I've really got the impression that he didn't necessarily know where to put Veron, and I wonder how much of that was because he knew where to put everyone else, and therefore there was only a certain place Veron could go, because he played out on the left. He would play sitting, he would play further forward. Sometimes there was the odd occasion he'd play almost as a number 10-ish type role, or like an advanced number 8, and all through it, I thought, well, I think he's good enough to do that. But then I'd probably say he was good enough to be a rocket scientist because I was that enamoured with him. And this game was a great example of he essentially starts out wide, And then by the end of the game, he's shifted maybe like half a space or like half a pitch inward, and he's just unplayable. But for that first half, you don't really see him. You're kind of thinking that United have been overawed, and it looks like they're playing with 10 men.
I mean, Jonathan, do you think one of the regrets for Manchester United is that, Veron was brilliant at Lazio, of course, won the league title there. We know Ferguson nearly left Manchester United around this time. And, of course, the man who was mooted to replace him was Ferdinand and Eriksson, who knew how to get the best out of Veron.
We get there.
And so do you think...
I thought this was too highbrow for Sven.
Do you think one of the great regrets for Manchester United is they never actually went for Sven and pushed out Ferguson?
No. I mean, I think the logic of signing Veron was sound in that he wanted greater control through midfield, and I think he was probably envisaging going to a 5-man midfield, which he did at times. But I mean, that was so unpopular that you go to Old Trafford and you'd hear them chanting 4-4-2, 4-4-2. It's such an extraordinary. I really like to think that had been a kind of true throughout football. The kind of when in around about 1960, when the back fours were replaced with WM, you had people kind of demanding, chanting WM, WM, WM. But I think particularly there's those 4 games, because he played them in the group and then the quarter final. Would have been this year or the following season when they played Deportivo. And I think those games, you saw the advantages that playing a 4-2-3-1 gave you. And I mean, I remember sort of watching Deportivo and sort of thinking, and I think we'd seen it a little bit year 2000 as well, that 4-2-3-1 got dribblers back in the game. It got proper dribbling wingers. It gave you the defensive screen to have those 2 slightly less reliable players, rather than playing your hard-working up and down wide midfielders, which even Beckham, magnificent crossover footballer he was, he worked really hard. He always protected Gary Neville. Whereas you could play those slightly more creative, exciting maverick players. And I think Ferguson was probably looking to go to something a bit more like that, to both give him the extra solidity in the middle without, and actually not merely not lose creativity, but give a greater variety of creativity. And I think the problem was that Veron was just coming into an ecosystem where everybody knew their role. He was a perfect midfield 4 with, I mean, okay, there's Nicky Butt there as well, who could come in and give you more solidity if you wanted. But the Keane and Scholes in the middle, Beckham and Giggs wide. That is the classic British and Irish midfield 4. And then you try and drop this somebody who comes from an entirely different culture, who's never played in an English 4-4-2. You try and bring him into that system, and there's a real problem of adaptation on both sides. And I think that's why it didn't work. And of course, there's a famous press conference the following May, when Ferguson leaves, going, "He's a fucking great player. Yous are all fucking idiots." Which is sort of I mean, in retrospect, probably correct.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that, yeah.
I don't think it's about Veron not being a good player or United not. It's just, sometimes good players and good midfields, you can't just take a good midfielder and put him in another good midfield and expect that to create a better midfield. That's not how football works. It's a complicated thing, and getting the balance right, even for somebody as experienced and clearly brilliant as Ferguson, it's not a. There's an element of gamble every time you do that.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question here, because I only get so long with Jonathan Wilson a year. If Veron was around now, do you think he would be, I suppose, on a higher tier as a footballer? Because because of the systems now would be easier to accommodate him, and I suppose there'd be more appreciation of his work.
In Premier League terms, yeah. I mean, I think he, in Italy and Argentina, he's hugely revered. But yeah, I mean, you can imagine him now in a modern 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1, which are not hugely different, I guess. You can imagine him being the slightly more creative one alongside Declan Rice or Calvin Phillips or something like that. And he
so for West Ham and Leeds, he'd play for West Ham and Leeds.
Well, do you know what though? But funny you saying about all this. He might well have been better playing for Tottenham Hotspur because under Hoddle, Hoddle would have loved that type of player. Strange thing, but of course he wouldn't have been surrounded.
Well, him alongside Stefan Freund.
It's the partnership that we were cruelly denied. One could argue, but generally going or at least talking about the game, as I said, Vish, we wouldn't have thought that even with crappy old Veron in the centre of the pitch, that Spurs would have raced into a 3-0 lead at half time. And you said Manchester United started quite brightly, and then the late Dean Richards scores. I think it was on his debut for Tottenham. Scores, the corner comes in and he gets a touch, and it's 1-0. And
the most expensive English signing not to have won a cap when he was signed.
Is that's a good stat? That.
So I phrase that very badly. He was the most expensive uncapped signing at the time at £8.1 million from Southampton.
Well, there you are. And he put them 1-0 up that day, and then 10 minutes later, Les Ferdinand is played through, nice pass from Gus Poyet, and does what Les Ferdinand does, just thumps it into the corner.
But that goal shows all the problems with United at this time. That Blanc, for some reason, the left side of the defence is 10 yards in front of the right side of the defence. Blanc steps up so late that I'm not even sure which phase of play he's in. And Ferdinand has so much time, and he literally, you can see him lining it up on his left foot to put in the bottom corner. And it must have been a thought in his head, I must be offside here, this doesn't feel right. And there's this incredibly poignant sight of Veron's bald head chasing back from miles up the pitch, because it's not his fault, but somehow the rest of the defence is just disintegrated, and Blanc's position is all wrong. And Veron ends up, even though he's 30 yards away, being the closest man to him, desperately chasing back and never going to get there, as Les Ferdinand does the thing that's easiest in the world to him, of hammering a ball really hard into the corner.
I think Barthez was even appealing for the offside at the start of that as well, and he would
do. That's what he did, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, he did it quite catastrophically that season in the FA Cup against
West Ham. Yeah,
when Di Canio was basically within handshaking distance of him, and he still had his hand in the air appealing for the offside. Incredible.
And then 2-0 became 3-0 just before half time, and this was actually a lovely Spurs goal. I think it was it Poyet who played the pass?
Yeah, Poyet's cross. Yeah,
and Spurs fans were cheering the passes. If you watch that footage back before he puts the ball in, and then Ziege with a lovely diving.
But again, the defence. I don't understand what's happened, because Ziege comes in behind Gary Neville, and David Beckham's sort of 15 yards upfield. Yeah. And Beckham goes berserk. Beckham starts punching himself on the thighs. But he seems to be doing that while shouting at Gary Neville. But it's not Gary Neville's fault. Gary Neville's tucked in behind the centre-back. Whether he's got sucked in too far because Blanc's gone walkabout. But I think that's Beckham's fault. That Beckham should be tracking Ziege.
Yeah, did Roy Keane then come out and say, well, if you're going to pick on Gary Neville, why don't you pick on me as well? Unfortunately for Beckham, he wasn't playing that day. But yeah, it was 3-0, and Manchester United were at 6s and 7s. Going forward, they still looked like they had a goal or two in them, which would obviously be the case. But you're right, at the back it was shambolic, and the Spurs fans cheering the passes at before 2-0 became 3-0.
That's a risk, isn't it?
It is a risk, and it's
you really are poking the beast by doing that. You're turning around and going, Nemesis, yeah. Around here.
but Fish, do you not think it was interesting, because they obviously thought, this ding dong, the witch is dead sort of thing. Manchester United, they're not so bad, to quote Rocky.
Even Ziege's celebration, in that it wasn't a celebration, and that was a really nice diving header, and then just kind of lays on the floor and just gets the acclaim, and even you can tell by the pitch of a crowd cheer of expectation of where they think the game is, and that was the cheer of right, this is ours. There was an element of win. Kind of, there was an element of like, right, we got this, let's enjoy the rest of it. Mm-hmm. And no doubt, David Beckham's punching himself in the thigh, then I think the well, that was the 4th minute, I think, of of added time in the first half as well. Yeah,
yeah, a rare one. Well, they get themselves in at half time, and the famous story, of course, from Roy Keane is that he said that despite all these criticisms of Sir Alex Ferguson and whatnot, he said that Ferguson always got, or nearly always got, his team talks, whether it be at half time or pre-match, spot on. He said he always got the mood quite right. And this one, of course, it was, what was it, 3 words? Lads, it's Tottenham. And then walked out the dressing room, apparently. That's how the story goes, Jonathan, anyway. And it seemed to have the desired effect.
Well, and there's the story as well, on the flip side of that, of, I can't remember which United player it is, but he says that as they were walking up the tunnel to go back on the pitch, he heard Teddy Sheringham say, "Whatever you do, don't let him score early."
Yeah.
What happens?
Yeah, within a minute. I tell you what, though, that is so damning on Spurs. I remember that deep talk, lads, it's Tottenham, and then walking out, of the dressing room to let them get on with it. And so many, a few mates of mine who support Spurs just were like, that is so disrespectful. But at the same time, they were like, yeah, fair enough, you've got us there.
And it's the same as the Chiellini line, isn't it? Of, this is the history of a Tottenham.
Yeah.
But it's, whether he said it or not, it's now something that is said whenever Tottenham do Tottenham-y, Spursy things.
Well, I mean, I wasn't at this game, but I was at the game 3 years later when they were 3-0 up at half time against 10-man Manchester City. I mean, Manchester City as well in those days, and lost it 4-3. And my report rapidly turned from Keegan on his way out to most incredible comeback in the history of the FA Cup.
I think Alan Hansen said it was like one of the best games he's ever seen, or something like that. But yes, I mean, so out they come, and as you say, within a minute, I think it was after the break, Andy Cole heads in. There was an extraordinary amount of headed goals in this game, and Andy Cole got a lovely one actually. And the cross came from the right side, and it was 3-1. And then at 3-1, Vish,
it's a really good move. Sorry, but
it's
a really good move. It's a classic sort of playing it long to Van Nistelrooy, then recycling it, and then in the end they've worked the overlap so that Beckham plays this pass into loads of space for Gary Neville, who's got time to shape his cross, and then good cross, good header. Yeah,
and it's 3-1, and then you're thinking, oh, are we back on, or are you still thinking, no, this is dead and buried?
I mean, when you score that early, you have to think you're back on, but it was also that when Cole makes contact with the ball, Solskjaer, who came on for Butt, I think,
came on for Butt before half time, which is
before half time.
When you were talking earlier about Varane moving into the middle, that's what allows it, because Solskjaer goes out to the left and Varane tucks in. So
Solskjaer, Van Nistelrooy, and Andy Cole are within 2 or 3 yards of each other in the box, and there was a sense of like, right, they're just going for it, and why wouldn't you 3-0 down? So to get a goal that early, I mean, I think it was more after the second goal, understandably, than this one, but my other memory from the goals itself were just how shambolic Spurs were. I'm sure it wasn't like this, but it really felt like they were just falling over.
Yeah,
they were so nervous that they couldn't keep upright. And
it's just one of those things in football when the momentum shifts, and it's so inevitable. Everybody knows what's going to happen. The opposition, the people who are on the team who are on the receiving end of it, just seem absolutely paralysed, and it just seems, Jonathan, they just can't stop it. It's kind of like, oh no, it's happening, and we just have to pray that they miss their chances.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the fascinating things about psychology in football, and how clubs have their own personalities, which are irrespective of the manager, irrespective of the players.
Yeah,
and it's really so. You often hear people say, "Oh, yeah, the most pointless statistic you'll ever hear is Team Y hasn't won away at Team X since 1974." Yeah, but that actually matters, because Team X knows, and its fans know, oh, we always beat this lot, and so as soon as they score, it's fine, it's the usual pattern, and that has an impact on the game. And United at this period were the masters of a comeback. So going 3-0 down is obviously non-ideal, but other teams would have felt they were dead and buried. United didn't. They knew if they got an early goal. Even Sheringham saying that shows it's in his mind, because he also knows the history of a Tottenham. That he knows that kind of Tottenham are exactly the type of team who are going to freeze once momentum tips. And, Roy Keane as a manager, obviously, it hasn't gone brilliantly for him, but the one season when it did go brilliantly, he somehow brought that Manchester United mentality to Sunderland. And Sunderland again and again that season were 1-0 down with 10 minutes to go. Mm-hmm. And even as a broadly pessimistic Sunderland fan, I'd be watching a game, we'd be 1-0 down, and you think, yeah, it's all right, we'll get an equaliser here. We might win this. And there were 2 games towards the end of that season against Burnley and Southampton, when we were 2-1 down with 10 minutes to go, won both games 3-2. And neither really came as a surprise. Both games you could sense. Sunderland knew that Roy Keane had somehow given them this Manchester United quality of keeping going, and maybe something to do with fitness work as well, I don't know, or maybe even specific psychological work he did.
Signing half the United reserves as well, that would have probably helped.
Yeah, a policy that rapidly ran out of steam. And the opposition also knew that oh Christ, it's this lot who always come at you, and there's a force there that we can't stop. And of course it shouldn't matter, but it does matter. And that's where, it doesn't matter how sophisticated statistical models and XG and things get, that weird psychology, particularly when crowds are in the stadium, the culture that surrounds clubs still has this bizarre impact.
Yeah, I mean, you see it with Manchester City in Champions League sometimes. At the time of recording, they may well have won the Champions League. So I should say that. But certainly in the early days when they were getting in there. But yeah, so 3-1, 12 minutes later becomes 3-2, and that man, Laurent Blanc, scores his first goal for Manchester United. And again, another header-ish. Yeah,
a delightful header. I think there was a corner before that where he almost gets on at the near post. And yeah, it was quite a delightful header. His little kind of springy Bambi legs get him up, and just a stupid thing to notice. But United are wearing white socks in this game, but he's wearing like almost.
Has he washed them with colours? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, but he's wearing like it's almost like he needs to hold his shins together. So he's got this 2 bits of thick black strapping. Kind of at the top and bottom of his shin with a gap in the middle, so you see the white of the socks, and he's got them on both shins, and it just looks like he's being held together. Maybe he'd add a back splint as well, but no, it gets up really well, and you can sense then like United are. I think every United player's running out of the box, ready to start again, and I think no Spurs players has moved because they're like,
it's inevitable. When that second one goes in, it's utterly inevitable.
It's almost like they think, well, if we don't kick off again, they can't. If we stay here,
this is the ultimate time wasting.
The worst they can do is arrest us, but we won't lose the game.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And because Ronnie Johnson misses a great chance, about 8 or 9 minutes later, and when he misses it, again, the surprise is. Well, obviously, if you miss a great chance, then people are expecting you to score, and there is an element of we've got away with that. I think, but the Spurs fans, it was almost as if, that's ridiculous how we've got away with that. Like, it seems inevitable that this is going to happen, and it's almost like not a disbelief because it was an easy chance, and there was you idiot, you kind of missed that. It was kind of, this is, do you see what I'm sort of struggling to say?
Well, there were 20 minutes left, weren't there, I think?
Yeah, 25 minutes left, yeah.
There was a sense that, well, they'll get another one, won't they?
I think so.
I mean, 20 minutes is a long, with 32 minutes from the second goal, it's a long time to hold out against the United with the win behind them.
Yeah, and that seemed to be what they were hoping on, was holding out, because they never really showed much intent, and that's what I mean. It was almost like they were paralysed to this fact that Manchester United are surely going to go on and win the game. And then on 71 minutes, Van Nistelrooy, he heads in as well. John, I think it was a header that he scored.
Yeah, from Sylvester. So Sylvester would come on for Dennis Irwin at half time.
That's right.
Which, I mean, Dennis Irwin obviously was a great cross of the ball, but I guess by this stage in his career, he probably didn't get forward quite as much or quite as quickly. So, I mean, he went off for injury. It wasn't a tactical issue, but I think it probably did help United having a little bit more pace from Sylvester. And again, it's Andy Cole doing a great job sort of linking up, which I think as his career went on, he got better and better at. And possibly is a bit of his game that was underrated. But you see how often in this game United went long, and either he or Van Nistelrooy wins it, holds it up, and then lays it off to midfielder, and then makes a run into the box. But I mean, here it's he lays it off to Sylvester, who crosses for Van Nistelrooy.
Yeah, and that was the turning point. 71 minutes, and then 75 were on scores. But there's something about that. The goals were kind of fairly sort of staggered until that point, and it's the old 1-2 they hit them with. Van Nistelrooy equalises, and then it's kind of like, right, lads, we've got them. They're done for now. We can only score more goals in this game. And a few minutes later, the Veron gets the ball out wide and stuffs it into the corner. It was a lovely finish, Vish.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the best goal of the lot, because Solskjaer, when he receives the ball, I can't remember who passes him the ball, but Veron essentially doesn't quite run over it, but he certainly runs around it and creates a kind of, almost like an infield overlap, as it were, to Solskjaer. So he ends up playing it first time. And the touch to set himself on his left foot with his right foot is out of this world. The first time I saw it, I thought he kind of Davos Sukered it and rolled his right foot over it to get it onto his left foot. But he doesn't. He kind of controls it on the half volley, and he cocks his right foot enough to get the ball exactly where he wants. And because his first touch is so good, he buys himself an extra split second. So he has a look in the middle to see if anyone else is better placed before deciding that he's the man who's going to do the job and just nails it into the far corner.
Yeah, and the celebration that ensues, it was very jubilant. There's still obviously that from 3-0 down to 4-3, you're going to be rather pleased with that. But it was we've won the game now.
Yeah, and this is a point as well when Veron, it hadn't become apparent it wasn't going to work. So I think that was his third goal in September. So I think people were aware that it wasn't quite gelling properly, but I think there was still a sense at this period that there's a lot of promise there, and this probably will come right eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And all that was left really in the game was for David Beckham to smash home the fifth Vish.
Yeah, just finding his range before taking down Greece the next week.
But you know what? He was still hated by the public at this point. Not quite as bad off the back of the '98 World Cup in that treble-winning season, but you can hear him getting whistled at times when he's on the ball. He's still very, very unpopular, he was, and then, as you say, 1 week later, he gets the free kick against Greece, and it's all changed.
Well, I mean, that Greece goal was the real, right, let's stop this.
Yeah.
Because, not just his performance in that game and the goal, obviously, but it was kind of in keeping with how Beckham was playing for England at the time, I think. Certainly around, qualifiers and whatnot. But he, that kind of ended it. So, and I suppose this was the last part of that last part of kind of away teams booing Beckham. There are loads of interesting videos on YouTube that dissect Beckham's technique, because he would rarely kind of really put his foot through the ball in the way that Veron did, say, with that goal to go 4-3 up. But this was almost the perfect combination of that cutting across the ball and putting his laces through it, that it just arced, and probably Speller, you know exactly what I'm talking about here.
Oh yeah,
fine marksman like yourself, but just the way he was able to hit it hard enough that it actually moves quite late. It's a bit like fast swing bowling. The reason fast swing bowling is so effective is that when the ball does move, it moves late. And it had a bit of that.
That's a full house. We've had
we've
had Marcus on Sven, me on Sunderland, you on cricket.
We even had that. We even had a mention of Keegan as well. So.
Yeah, we did. That's the freebie. That's the bonus ball.
It's a brilliant technique, and not a strike that you see, or we certainly saw a lot of from Beckham.
Yeah, it was a great goal and a fitting one to end the scoring in this 8-goal thriller.
It was 87 minutes, by the way. So there was still time for a sixth.
It was. And a bit disappointing that they couldn't do to Tottenham what Southampton had done to them, of course, in at the Dell that famous time.
Don't mention that on this.
Well, I just thought,
show.
Yeah. But Manchester United, they did finish third that season. Jonathan. They lost. They would reach the semi-finals of the Champions League. They lost to Bayer Leverkusen on away goals. So this was a great second half performance, of course, but the season would ultimately end in a fairly disappointing way.
Yeah, I mean, I think this exposed that defensively they just weren't quite as good as they needed to be, and I think that there's a whole number of reasons for that, but the change of goalkeeper, it obviously took a while to replace Schmeichel properly, and probably until they got Van der Sar they didn't. Blanc didn't really work out. Irwin getting towards the end. So I mean, for most teams, third place in a Champions League semi-final is a great season. But given what we'd seen from United, it obviously felt like a bit of a letdown. Yeah,
but they did win the league the following season, Vish.
They did, yeah. This I had to remind myself because I was like, I'm sure United went on a pretty impressive run in this season, and they were top for most of the new year, so the start of 2002. But that was offset by Arsenal matching United for games for wins while also having games in hand, which they were ultimately able to take. And then obviously Wiltord gets the winner at Old Trafford in that game, and it goes from there. But I would love to, doing this and going through it. I was like, I don't know how you'd be able to do this in real life, and I suppose we could always wait for the next lockdown, but it'd be quite good to, much in the same way you might rewatch The Sopranos, just go through a league season, because this is one of the more interesting ones actually of that time, I think.
Well, it's been a pleasure dissecting it with you, my good man. For more stories like that, ladies and gentlemen, do check out theblizzard.co.uk. Vish, always a pleasure having you on the pod. I can say that now because you've been on more than once.
No, thank you for having me.
No, not at all. Jonathan and I will be back next week with another great game from the history of football. See you then.